For several years, Barbara and Glenn had been going to Yuma, Arizona, for 3 or 4 months during the winter. And so each year, Kenny said, "Well, shall we go?" Well, finally, I quit tutoring and I agreed to go. But I'm not going to stay 3 months. 3 weeks, 4 weeks at the very, very longest. So Barbara and Glenn had already gone on ahead because I didn't want to go till after Christmas, after New Year's. So we left in January, I think. And the first night we left, why we stayed all night at Reading. And of course, the first time we went in there, we stopped there. And these lodges are really, really good for guests and so on. And so we went in, the manager said, "Well, come sit at our table," or I mean the governor. So we had dinner that night with the governor of the lodge. So then we went on down, and I cannot remember the name of the place. It's the town right before you go over the Tehachapi, Arizona. But anyway, Punky lived there. So when we got there, we parked in the parking lot at the Moose Lodge. I think they charged us $5. And I called Punky, and she and Leanne came down, and we had dinner together, and we spent the evening in the motorhome. And then the next morning we got up and went over the Tehachapi and into Arizona, into Needles, and straight on. And I don't know for sure where we stayed the next night, but then we went through a town called Paradise, and Dick and Arlene were there, and we saw them for a little while, and then we went on into Yuma, and it was Barbara and Glenn at this time were at a RV park, and it was crowded, but they put us in the overflow because somebody was going to be leaving in a couple of days. So we stayed a little ways away from Barbara and Glenn then, and when these people moved, I think we were only about 4 or 5 spaces from them. And this was at an RV park, and there was a clubhouse there, and so we could go to play bingo twice a week, and then on Saturday nights they had a dance. Well, I think we only went to one dance, but we did go to bingo, and Kenny played, even though he didn't like it, but we did. And so Glenn was a great one. He'd been going down there 3 or 4 years, and so he knew the town, and some of the guys that he'd worked with up here had retired, and their families were down there, so there was 3 or 4 families down there. And so nothing Glenn likes better than to show people new places or just travel. So one of the first places we went there was a church, and it was pretty close to the clubhouse, or to the RV park, a few places. And we went up there, and it wasn't a little church, and it wasn't a great big one, but you had to be there early, not only to get a seat, but just to get in the church, because it was 90% snowbirds. And this was probably one of the first things he showed us. And then he said, "Well, you need to see the town." So we went through Yuma. One of the things that we saw was right outside of Yuma, a little ways, they had parachuters, a practice, I guess. And it was kind of like, I would call it an air show, but I guess it was just more or less them. And they had, I don't know, 6 or 8 planes flying. And it'd make you wonder how they missed each other. And they had some kind of I don't know what it was, but they let out, it wasn't a gas, well, or I don't think it was, but it was colored, and it'd make different streaks all through the sky. Some of them would be orange and red and green, and they'd circle each other and go under each other and over the top of each other. And then down on the ground, they had a big circle, and I don't know whether it was just marked with like chalk powder or whether there was anyway, there was this circle in the middle of the ground, and then when these planes would get through diving and so on at each other, why then one of them would start, and when they'd get right over the top, a parachuter trooper would jump, and in just a few minutes, why the next one would, and this was their practice. And we watched them go several different times, and not once did those paratroopers land outside that circle. And that circle wasn't really that big. And the day we were out there, why they said that they would take people up and you could jump with them. And I don't know how you do it. I guess you'd hang on to them or something. You'd be strapped to them or some way. So I told Barbara, I said, if you'll do it, I will. Well, I knew she wouldn't do it, but I always kind of wished I'd have done it. And another place we went was some kind of where you could watch the horse races. And Glenn used to go out there, and there was a big pavilion out there, and all kinds of booths and tenants that would have all these booths and so on. And Glenn would watch the horse races, or well, that was all on TV. But they did have dogs run, and once in a while, there would be real horses run. So Glenn spent a lot of time up there, and Kenny usually stayed up there with him, and they'd study these charts to see which horse was supposed to come in first and which one was the best and all this. Well, one day afternoon, Barbara and I thought, well, we'll bet. Well, I think Barbara kind of listened to him, but I didn't. I looked at the names of the horses, and the horses that I liked, the names was what I put in order, and you could either put first or place or wherever you thought they'd place or what on. So I had mine listed down, and like I say, by names, and instead of putting them first or second or anything, I just put place, and I happened to win $17, and I don't know what the rest of them won. Glenn was pretty lucky; he won ever so often, but most of the time while they were doing this, Barbara and I'd be out walking on there and looking, just shopping, and mostly just looking. So one day, Kenny, he decided he'd go, but we didn't go with him. And when he came back, he had this picture, and he's riding a moose, and it looked so real that we thought maybe it really was. Well, Glenn, he decided maybe he ought to go down, and he wanted to know if they had an elephant. He'd have his picture taken with an elephant, but he never did do this. Another place we went was they had, I think, only one, and we only went a casino. And as far as I know, there's probably several in town, but we only went to this one, and I don't think we went over twice the month that we were down there. And Kenny had a nephew that lived there. He had a nephew that married this girl, and her dad owned these packing place, and they farmed some in Mexico. Lettuce is what they grew, different kinds of lettuce, and they had some fields stateside. So Keith would fly back and forth and manage this for him. Well, a Mexican fella in a truck ran into him and killed Keith. And Johnny had been down there, his brother Johnny had been down there working for him. And so he took over as manager. And I think he probably bought this packing plant. And so anyhow, we looked him up, and he took us to the fields there in the States, and we watched them pick these. They have pickers come across from Mexico, and that truck would bring them in early in the morning. And I don't know whether they had green cards or anyway, they could come in, but they had to go back. So they'd get there pretty early in the morning, and by 4 o'clock, they were picked up and took back on to the other side. But we watched them pick these heads of lettuce, and they'd put them on some kind of a auger or something that would haul them up and load these trucks, and then these trucks would drive into this packing place. And it went all through all kinds of water and so on. And then when it would come out the other end, it would be all wrapped tight in cellophane. And then that was shipped all over the United States, I guess. And he had some of these fields in Mexico, and we did later see some in Mexico, but we didn't see his. But every year that we went down there, why, we'd spend Super Bowl Sunday with Johnny. Now, his wife and he had separated, and he had a Mexican lady. He had 2 kids. One of them was a teenager, and the other, we called her a little girl, but she was 20, or in her early 20s, and she had some kind of a handicap that she was no bigger than a 3-year-old. She couldn't talk, she couldn't walk, she just sat in a little rocking chair. And they had tried, he and his wife, they'd sent her all over the United States trying to find what they could do for her. And finally, they had just gave up. And this little girl, she was just a pretty, and she looked like a little girl, just real pretty, and she'd smile a lot, and she'd take your hand or so on. But anyhow, he had this Mexican lady come over and take care of her, and she'd come on Sunday night and stayed on Friday night, and then Johnny took care of her himself during the weekend. And his son Julius, he had a friend about his same age, and his mother was a single mother, and I think she helped Johnny a lot. And she came over, but she did come over when we were, the first couple times we were there. She come over and she'd help him fix dinner and so on, and he'd barbecue steaks, and then we'd watch the ball game. Well, the last couple times we went, why, he'd married a lady, and she lived there, and it was the same thing again. We were there, and then we'd take them out to dinner a couple times, and we'd stop in his plant ever so often to see him. And these friends of Glenn's that had moved down there, of course, we had to go meet them, and we did know a couple of them ahead of time. And they raised grapefruit and oranges and tangerines and can't think of the name of the other fruit, tangelos. And so we had all the fruit except the tangelos, and Kenny and Glenn always had to have a tangelo break in the morning. And So we spent time with them, and so that was the most that I think that we did right in Yuma. And sometimes we'd leave early in the morning, and we'd probably have maybe toast and those grapefruit or some kind of fruit. And at mid-morning, why, it was time to go. And we went all the way around Yuma and so on. And one place, now this isn't according to one year after another because I can't keep years straight, but one time uh, we went out south and east. They'd heard that there was some camels out there, so we'd go see the camels. Well, we went out there, and it was, I don't know, just rocks and rocks. I guess maybe it was foothills. I don't know. But anyhow, Glenn was driving. We always took the Jeep behind the motorhome. We took the Jeep with us. Anyhow, Glenn was driving so Kenny could sightsee. And we started this, and whether he missed the wrong road or whether there wasn't any road, but he turned up this, and it was kind of a trail like when we first started. And the farther we went, the bigger the rocks got. The only car we saw on this trip out here in all these rocks where we were was one, and it had an Oregon license tag on it. We didn't see anybody around the car. I don't know whether they were out walking or whether they fell off of the rocks. I don't know. But anyhow, we started up this one place, and oh, I thought the bottom of the Jeep was going to be torn out. It just awful. And Barbara was saying, let's turn around and go back. And Kenny said, there's no way we can turn around because there's bigger rocks on each side of the road we were going. Well, we got high-centered, I thought. And Glenn got out. He said, it's your Jeep. He said, I can't go any farther. I don't know what to do with it. So Glenn got out and ran around the car, and Kenny scooted over and put it in four-wheel drive. And we went up over that rock and just went bouncing. And finally, we got clear across and came to a highway. We never ever saw any camels. And when we got to that road, Barbara said, I'll tell you one thing, we're not going to go looking for camels anymore. So that was our day on that trip. Another time, oh, and we always went to Mexico at least twice. And going down to Mexico, one place we went, they had where the shrimp boats came in. And we went down there and had shrimp salad. And we just drove down there to eat and to look around. And I suppose it was probably 30 or 40 miles down there. And there was a mission there and a school, but the kids weren't in school for some reason. I don't know why. But we went down there 2 or 3 times. Another time we went to this place, and I don't know, I can't remember the name of it. But anyhow, I don't think we had to show any passports or anything going in. We could go in, and I don't. It was a town, I guess, or a little town, but where we were, it was just kind of a all kinds of shops and so on, and one thing, Glenn usually always got a haircut. The haircut had cost him about $4. And I wanted to buy a leather jacket, and I'd seen them in there before, and they had a price tag on this one, $175. Well, I'd been to some other shops and knew they were a lot cheaper when I was looking, and they come over and you want to buy, and I think they kind of like to, dig her back and forth and bring the prices down, and only $175. And I said, oh, that's way too much. I won't pay that for a coat. I said, oh, I'll shop around some more. Well, and they kept bringing it down. How about so and so and so? And I said, they got to $100. And I said, no. I said, we'll go shopping and maybe I'll come back. And this guy came out from the back and he said, how much you pay? And I said, oh, I'd pay maybe $75. He said, oh. So I bought a black leather jacket, $100 cheaper than we started out with. Uh, and Barbara, somebody was always arguing, ordering stuff with her, especially vanilla. So we go to this one store and buy vanilla and so on. And then there was a beer garden, and it was a huge garden. And I think there was kind of trees at one side and so on, but they had, well, I guess you could probably have anything you wanted, but we would, uh, they'd bring you all these chips and what did they do? Oh, strawberry margaritas. They had any flavor margarita you wanted. Well, one time there was an entry on two different sides, and one time we just barely started, got inside the door, and I heard somebody yell at me, and it was one of the principals that I taught for here quite a bit, and he said, "There's Marie Anderson." And I hollered back, and there's Roy Van Horn. So we spent a little bit of time with them, but we'd stay in this garden, and there was all kinds of vendors that came in there, especially ones with necklaces or bracelets or flowers, and these vendors would just keep coming, and they even had little kids. I don't think I'll tell you about one little boy. I don't suppose he was over 6 years old, and he had a tray, and he had all these necklaces, and he had some rings on them, and he come over and laid them on our table. He'd say, "You buy $2, $2." And we'd talk to him, and he couldn't talk very much English. But one time he come over and he laid his tray right on the middle of our table, and he went around playing and playing and playing, and then he come back. He said, "You buy $2." Well, usually we didn't buy anything from him at all, and he just went us singing on through there, and he was over there, oh, all afternoon, nobody with him or anything. And if anybody did buy anything, why, he just stick the money in his pocket and go on and lay that tray down someplace else and go on. Well, every time we were down there, I think we were down there 5 different times, why, the beer garden was, or this garden was the best place to go. Well, anyhow, then we had to, well, we never did drive down. Some people did drive in, but we didn't. We'd park up in a parking lot and then walk in. Well, then when you got ready to go out, you had to go through customs. And you better learn what time of day to go. One time, I bet we stood in line 2 hours. And that time Kenny wasn't walking too good, so he kind of sat down at the entrance this one time. And I know it was at least 2 hours, because we finally started taking turns. Some of us would sit down and let the other ones stand in line. And then when we'd get down there, they had to go through customs. You had to show your passport. And this was all to get back in the American side. And they'd go through anything you bought. And of course, any kind of booze, especially vodka, and I don't know what Kenny bought. But anyway, it was a lot cheaper, but you could only buy, I think, two bottles. Each one of you could get one. Well, you had to carry this stuff and stand in line and hold it. Of course, everybody had a big shopping bag and so on, but that's what took forever when you went to go through customs. They went through everything and checked it, wanted to know where you were from, and even though it was on your passport, they talked to you. So, but we went down there at least twice every year we were there. Um, Another place we went down to Tucson, and that was kind of different. We went down there to it was a mission that we went down there, and there was this. I wouldn't call it a cathedral, but it was a big church, and we went in, and on one side of it there was kind of an alcove, I would call it, and it's really kind of hard to explain, but there was a body laying over there, and what it looked like, it was up on a kind of a stone, I would say, it wasn't exactly a stone wall, but it was kind of a stone table like built, and the nearest thing that looked like it was that there was a young woman buried there, and it just looked like that she was laying in this kind of a bed like, and she had on a long red and gold robes, and she had some kind of a crown on her head, and all of this was encased in glass from the bottom part of what looked like a bed clear up. The whole thing was in the glass, and I don't know for sure how many years it was, and I don't know if she was some kind of a martyr or something, but anyway, she had been encased in this for over 100 years, I think, and it just looked like a young woman laying there asleep, and like I say, they said it was like 100 years old. Well, this was an old mission, and they had all kinds of headstones and so on. And every one of these headstones around the church had some kind of a special saying on them. And it was, and I think they did have church there. But anyway, it was very religious looking and very well kept up. And in the same place in Tucson we went, and it was a jail. And they had tour guides going there. And they gave us a little talk before we went in. They said there wasn't much trouble around this there, and no one wanted to get arrested and be put in this jail by Sheriff so-and-so. They said he had a gun, but he carried a big club. And they said, if you were in jail once, why, you didn't want to be there again. But if by some chance, which was very, very seldom, you broke out, when you came back in, then you really did have a rough time, because lots of times you didn't get anything but bread and water. Well, we went in through this, and when we walked and looked at some of these cells, and there was absolutely nothing in there but a bed. And the bed had about a mattress that wasn't any higher than, I don't know, maybe 4 inches. And they said that's the only mattress they got. There was no water fountains or anything like in there. And I guess to get water, they'd bring them water. They said they'd carry them in a pail, and they only got water so often a day. You just couldn't say, hey, I want a drink, and get a drink. And the meals, just like this tour guide said, if you have one of the meals, why, you can feel lucky that you even got anything, but it isn't anything that you'd order. And so this is kind of interesting. And then right before you started in this, why, they had a bunch of chains hanging down, and on them were those cuffs that they put on your ankles, and they even had some of those big balls there. And like he said, we have very few criminals here. And when we went on through Tucson, we went on up, and even though it was really hot going down there, it froze that night. And we didn't have any trouble with our RVs, but we saw several people that the pipes had froze, and they were fixing those. And we went in a restaurant there, and the manager come over and said, don't leave your rigs unlocked, because he said there's going to be some, I suppose they were patrol officers coming through, because he said there's been some illegals come here. And when we drove along, we did see some people that had come across the border illegally or slipped through, and they were just sitting in the middle of the road waiting for a bus to come pick them up. And they'd round up these people that had come across, and they just looked so ragged and so on, the ones we saw. And some of them didn't even have shoes on. And they just sat there, and this bus would come and pick them up. And they said they'd take them back across the line, the border, and dump them out. And they said, and some of them will be here back tomorrow. And so we went, we saw several of those people. And when we went down to this shrimp place that we went off, and we'd go by a lot of places, and they weren't on the road, but you could see it, these houses, they're more like shacks, and they weren't that big, so I don't know how big of families they might have had, but you'd always see 3 or 4 dogs around the house, but like somebody said, every one of them had a TV antenna. So they did have TV. And then one year we went on what they called the Buffalo Tour. And we went down and we went by the place where we got shrimp, and then on through another town. And when we got there, why, the bus driver, I wanted to see this bus had a buffalo head hooked on the front of it, so it was called the Buffalo Tours. Well, anyhow, I had to stop, and he turned around and he said, the bus driver said, we're going to be inspected. He said, don't say a word and don't try to hide anything, because he said, it's the Mexican police. And I don't know what they called them. They didn't call them police, but anyway, they come in. I think there was 3 of them that come through the bus, and they all had rifles, and they walked from the front of the bus to the back, and they were talking Spanish or Mexican to each other. And once in a while they'd look in, or they'd kneel down and look up that way. So whether they were looking for somebody or something, the bus driver said it's one or the other. Well, we don't know which. But they did have, I imagine there were probably 6 of them, because while the 3 of them were going through the inside of the bus, why, they were crawling underneath the bus, and they had the driver open the compartment where the luggage was. And I don't think they went through any luggage, but they did sort through it and take out some of the suitcases and just set them there. And so I suppose we were there probably, at least 45 minutes. So then we started east, and this tour went clear to the ocean on the west side. And every little town we'd go through, the bus driver would honk. And you could tell that he made these tours often, because he'd honk, and the ones in the street, and the little kids would run out, and he'd usually, at least with us, and I suppose he usually did, he'd throw out candy out the window and pick out. Well, we went clear across the country, and we got there, we unloaded at this hotel, and after we checked in, we went up and on the roof. I don't know what you'd call it. Maybe, well, it wasn't a garden or anything, but they did have trees up there and plants and so on. And they had snacks and mostly chips and whatever you wanted to drink, but Mai Tais mostly time Mai Tais. And it was getting towards evening, and then they had a restaurant downstairs, and Kenny and Glenn ordered lobster, and the platters they brought them on were huge. They were like that, but these lobsters hung over the side. I mean, no way could they eat it all, but they tried. And side dishes went on around, and Barbara and I just ordered fish and chips. But anyhow, they had, these people that come around and sing and so on. And I don't know whether they had ukuleles. They weren't guitars, but they'd sing. And every once in a while, they'd stop and sing to one of the women or something. Well, they picked out Barbara and I. And so they stopped right behind us. And they stood there and I sang a couple songs to us. I don't even remember what they were. But anyhow, then they patted us on the shoulder and they went on. And then the next morning, we boarded the bus again, and they had some kind of I'm going to say bass, I'm not sure. But over on the coast clear on the coast is where we went. And we saw these bringing in these fish. And they were huge fish. I don't know, bass is about like so, but these were big fish. I mean, like this. And everybody there got out and watched, but you stayed out of their way because those people worked really fast. And after we watched that, we went on, and I'm going to call it a little village because I don't think you could buy any food there, but they did have a lot of shops. But when we drove up there, why, all you could see was, there were 3 or 4 dogs running in the street. And there was just one street, but there were shops on both sides. And when we drove up there, why, the driver honked, I don't know, 3 or 4 times, and never once that village just come alive. I mean, the doors were open, and within 5 or 10 minutes, why, you'd think that had been open forever because people were going across the street and coming out of their stores hollered and, and trying to get you to come in and so on. And so we walked the length of the street and back, but we didn't buy anything. And so then we headed, and coming across, we went through some desolate looking country, and like I say, there was these shacks that made you wonder how people even survived because you didn't see any fields or you don't know how they even lived. Well, going back, we took a different road, and it was a much more prosperous country than we'd seen coming over. And we went, it showed how they did their irrigation. You could see them doing something like that along the road. And we did go through one beer place where they made beer, and I don't drink beer. Kenny drinks very little, but anyway, they'd give you, and I've still got the glass out there about so high, a glass of beer. And then after that, we got on the bus and went back home, or went back and we got home. Oh, it was late by the time we got back, and then he was offering another tour, but to go someplace else. But we never ever took another tour like that. Okay, I'm sure there's lots of other places, and I may think of them later and tell you. And I think we went down there four or five times, and I would be ready to come home by 3 or 4 weeks at the longest. And Glenn's, they finally started coming and going with us. One time we headed down there, and they'd called ahead of time, and Doris had, Glenn's mom had met when she was 9. She and a girl from New York were pen pals, and they had moved to New York here, and they invited us up to dinner, and it was up at Snowflake, which is a little ways off of the road, but not too much. And their name was Morsi. And when we got up there, we went in, and it happened to be Andy Morsi, and he was stationed on Saipan with Kenny at the time that they were, and we got acquainted with them when we went back to Branson those times. So we spent the afternoon with them, and every time when we were in Arizona, while we drive up to Barbara's sister, she lived up at Florence, and there was mines up there, and we could see the trucks going way high, and they'd circle around in this corner and come back down, and we'd spend the day just shopping like that. One place we went to was another town called, I think it was Jerome, and it had a mine there, and Barbara would never go in any place like that, so we didn't go. But they had Kenny and Glenn put on, they had raincoats and hats like miners wear, and the light there, because I guess in place it got dark in there, and they rode a cog train, and they were gone probably, I imagine they were gone a couple, 3 hours. And Barbara and I went shopping, and of course we each had to buy a ring. And then there was some kind of a fun house in there, and you went in there, and there were mirrors every which way. And these mirrors, if you bought a dress in there, or you could go through these mirrors to see how they looked. Well, some places they'd have you really, really thin, and you really looked nice in whatever you had on. And another place, it'd make you just about as heavy as you never ever wanted to be. And so this was kind of fun, and there was a lot of women in there, and they were doing it more for fun than anything. I think Barbara and I did buy some sweatshirts, but we didn't put them on. But we did go stand in the mirrors, and they were, I don't know, about 6 or 8 sides to them. So every way you'd turn, some places you'd be fat, some places, sometimes you'd be fat someplace else, or skinny, or so on. So it was just kind of a tourist trap thing. Another place we went, I don't know what kind of a place that was, but Glenn and Kenny went down underground in that place too. And Barbara and I had to wait for him, and it was cold and windy there, so I don't know, it wasn't a mine, but it was something that they built underground. I don't know, it had something to do with government stuff, so I don't know. But they went through there, and then one time on the way home, why we always went up to Bullhead City, and Bullhead City was in Arizona, and then you just go a few miles north and a few miles, maybe 2 miles, and then you'd come back down to, there were more just casinos and shops, and I don't know if there was even any place to eat there except in one of the casinos and so on. And we would park right across the street there. And like I say, I think they only had one street through that town in this parking lot. Well, anyhow, we got there and parked, and Glenn had his pickup, and I don't know how it's coming. I guess he was going to have it serviced or something because it wasn't running right. And we went over to Bullhead City, and they said that his truck wasn't, they wouldn't go any place with it, and they had to put a new motor in it. So we were there a week, and they could stay in their RV because it was already over this other parking lot on the California side. So every day we would start out, and there was, and I should remember the name of the city, little town, and we went across, what was that highway that was famous, Route 36 or 66 or whatever. Anyway, one thing about that town, you went in, and they weren't donkeys, they were little burros. They had the run of the town, and they were just as tame as any dog you ever saw. And the stores would let them go in their stores. They'd just go up and down, and people would buy carrots and feed them. And they were just kind of little pests, I thought, because they'd follow you around and they'd nudge you, and they would want their carrots while we were there. Why, they had this want thing, like, wanted, and there had been a little black one, and it was a baby. I think it had been weaned and so on, but somebody stole it, and they had, I don't know how many $1,000 reward for it. Whether they ever got it back, of course, we never ever knew. But we went up to this place a couple of different times, and it was kind of a fun place too. There was always shootouts going on somewhere, either at the first part of the street, or sometimes they'd have three of them all going at once. And then we went, every town or every place around. Of course, we had a week to spend there, and of course that prolonged my getting home by a week, but that was all right. And we'd go over to Bullhead City and check on that. I got my hair fixed once there, and I don't know what they did, but every night we'd play bingo. And I think bingo was really cheap, like 3 cards for $1 or something like that. And of course, Kenny didn't like bingo, and he said we played bingo every night for a week. And he said, I won one game, and it was the last night we were there. But the rest of us, of course, you usually just had 3 cards. So, and also they had different kinds of shows. Sometimes they were just they were live. They weren't a theater or anything. They were live plays or musical people. come in, and I don't remember the name of the one, but there were 3 or 4 couples from different parts of Arizona, and they all came there. We all met there one night and saw this performance, and it was just a musical and so on. And but like I say, we were there a week. And another time, Kenny and I were coming home by ourselves, and we got, I can't tell you the name of that town either, but something happened to the motorhome, and they had to order a part for it. But thank goodness we had the Jeep. And I think we drove within a 40-mile radius. We was in every town, every road there was. And one place we went up to was where they mined borax for wax soap. And we saw the 14 mule team come down out of the hills with this stuff. And it was interesting. We got to see how they made some of this and so on. So we spent several hours up there. And another place we went, they had air shows. These airplanes would take off, and they were some old-fashioned airplanes where there'd only be one pilot, and they do skydiving and so on. So we watched that, and every day we went somewhere to see something just to pass the time away, because we couldn't sit in the motorhome because it was in this big garage, but we could stay all night there. Well, the night that they got it finished, it was windy, and Kenny gave him the credit card, and the guy took it and filled it all out and so on. Well, later that evening, while we were down eating dinner in this cafe, and the mechanic come in and said, "Would you mind filling out another?" And he said, the wind took that and blew it away, and I couldn't find it. It just didn't have it. And Kenny said, "Okay, I'll do it." And I said, "Well, post-date it or backdate it or something in case somebody finds the thing and cashes it in or something, you can use it." And so that's what they done. And he filled out another, and do you know, we never ever got a bill from them. So whether he lost the second one or what, I don't know. And the bill was over $300, and so we didn't know. We didn't have any records or anything of it. So anyway, whatever they done to the motorhome, why, it was free. So anyhow, when we got home, and then 3 times we went to Bandon. The first time we went to Bandon, I got some kind of a ticket somewhere, I guess at the Moose Lodge or something. And anyhow, I'd won a bed and breakfast ticket at Bandon. And so when I got home, I told Kenny, "Well, how about a date and going to the coast?" And he said, "Okay, why? When do you want to go?" And I said, "Oh, I don't know." I said, "But to spend the weekend anyway." And he knew. He said, "Why?" And I said, and I showed him what I won. He said, "I can't believe it, bed and breakfast." So anyway, Joey and Larry Stratton went with us. We drove over to Bandon, and when we checked in, when we went in the room, and there was these hot cinnamon rolls, a whole big tray of them, and you could have tea or coffee or chocolate, whatever you wanted, and it had it there. And So we had dinner, and I think we went out to dinner that night after that. And when we got breakfast, why, time do you want breakfast? And I think we probably said about 9 o'clock. I don't know. But anyhow, they brought, I think you could order, but it was they fruit and, a big breakfast. I mean, bacon, eggs, and all of this. They were really, really nice hosts. And the next morning, the wind was blowing, and it was kind of rainy like. And I wanted to go walk on the beach. Well, Kenny had been, I don't know whether he was still doing runs or whether, but anyhow, he hadn't had much sleep. And he said, I don't want to go walk on the beach. I'm going to take a nap. Because we didn't have to check out, I don't think, till noon. And Larry, I guess he just wanted to watch TV, and Joey was going to read. And I said, well, I'm going to go walk to the beach. And I did. I was probably gone 45 minutes or so on. And it was really neat. I met another lady down there, and she had a little white dog. And he'd run ahead, and then he'd come back, and run ahead and come back. And so like I say, it was about probably 45 minutes, and we came back, and the lady had brought in some tarts, stuffed tarts with different kind of jam and jelly on them. So we had them, and then, like I say, we had to check out, so we went down and we drove through Bend, and then I don't think we done much shopping. We did go down to the beach, and it was just rainy, so we didn't do much else. The next time we went down there was with Barbara and Glenn, and we had been at Coos Bay, and we decided we'd go for a drive, and of course that's where we ended up. And we were in our RVs at that time, and we went in the Elks Lodge that night. And Kenny and I danced, and I think Glenn played, and Barbara played the machines and so on. So we stayed there till, I don't know. I think we stayed all night there in the parking lot. And the third time we went down there, we started out just for a drive, and we ended up there. And that time we went down through town and so on, and went in several of the stores, and we saw this one store, and it was a kind of a dress shop or clothing store. So we went in there, but in the front of it, they had estate jewelry, and Barbara wanted to buy a ring, and we all ended up buying a ring. And the one that really took their eye was a gold ring. Man, and Glenn and Kenny both liked it. And Glenn kept trying it on, and he could not get it on. And it had an Indian head on it, and I can't tell you anymore what it said, but it was years before somebody found out what was on there. But anyhow, we each bought a ring, and Kenny wore that ring as long as he lived. I don't know, he wore it everywhere and got lots and lots of compliments on it because it was so different and had so much engraving on the side of it. But that time we went down to the docks, and we saw some boats come in, and when we went back, we went through Tillamook Cheese Factory and so on. This was one of Glenn's main things, was to sightsee, and he didn't care what kind of country it was. And so I'll have to tell you about this ring. After Kenny passed away and couldn't wear it anymore, I gave that ring to Glenn, and I think he said $300 he paid to have it made big enough for him, because they had to cut it some way and put some gold band in there or something. I don't know. It might not have been that much, but it was quite quite a little bit over that. And then I think that was about all the traveling we did for a while. But it was time to go back to Kansas. About 6 months after our anniversary, we went back at the RV, and that's where I don't know if Mother's Will had been read or not. I think last week I said it had, but I'm not too sure, because all of us had to be there, and we went down in a basement. The lawyer was there, and we went through that, and I think we stayed in the motorhome that was parked behind Betty and Ron's property, where we stayed most of the time. And I know that meeting was the last time that my brothers and sisters were together, and it might very well have been the last time I ever saw Joanne, because about 14 years before, there was a flu that went through, and it settled in her lungs, and the doctors gave her 14 years to live, and it was just pretty near to the week that she passed away. She lived about I think about 2 years after we were back there, though, and she was the first to sell any day's land. She sold her quarter, and so that was the first of the breast and hand land being sold. Then the girls sold their land. Joyce and Shirley and Shara, they sold theirs, and theirs was breast and hand. At the same time, my cousin, she sold hers that belonged to my aunt, and that was also breast and hand land. There was a lot of the breast and hands, and there was only one day. And then, so the only land that is still in the family is Betty's pasture and Larry Bill's land. My land was never either days or breast and hand, but Dad had bought it probably, I don't know, 50, 60 years ago then. So they were all century families. At one time they had some kind of a thing going on back there in these century families. Well, our family would probably be, with land, would probably be closer to between 150 and 170 years now. Mother's family was a century family, and also the St. Francis Kenny's land was a century family.
South of the border, down Mexico way, that's where I fell in love when the stars above came out to play. And now as I wander, my thoughts ever stray south of